Paris, June 1940. The sound of church bells mingles with the metallic echo of German tanks. In less than 2 months, the unthinkable happened. France, the pride of Europe. Cradle of the revolution and liberty knelt before Hitler. How could a nation that had resisted empires, defeated Napoleon, and survived the First World War fall so swiftly? What happened to the continent's most powerful army? And why, in the summer of 1940, did the entire world hold its breath as Paris burned? The answer lies in a single word: speed. Germany didn't just invade France, it reinvented warfare. With lightning-fast tanks, aircraft roaring like thunder, and a strategy so bold it seemed insane, Hitler transformed chaos into a weapon. While French generals anticipated trench warfare, the Nazis sped through the Ardennes forester terrain everyone claimed impassable. But they crossed it, and in just 46 days, France collapsed. This is not merely a forgotten chapter of World War II. It is a lesson about arrogance, innovation, and fear. It is the moment Europe realized war had changed and no one was ready for what came next. When the Nazis marched through Paris, the world understood something terrible. Freedom could be lost in less than 2 months. In this documentary, you'll discover how an audacious plan conceived in secrecy and executed with surgical precision turned France into the stage for one of the swiftest, most humiliating defeats in modern history. You'll learn about the mistakes of French generals, the desperate decisions of the British, and the terror that gripped millions of civilians fleeing along the roads. But above all, you will understand why this invasion changed the course of the world. Between the end of the First World War and the beginning of the Second, Europe lived through a tense silence, a heavy silence woven from unhealed wounds and broken promises. The continent was exhausted, but not at peace. Germany, humiliated by the Treaty of Versailles, bore the weight of shame and poverty. Its army was restricted, its borders shrunken, its economy shattered. The German people, who had once fought with pride, now walked the streets searching for bread and dignity. It was in this landscape that Adolf Hitler rose, a charismatic orator, a man who promised to restore the nation's lost glory. Hitler didn't just speak to Germany's wounded heart. He offered something more dangerous, a common enemy. According to him, those responsible for the country's ruin weren't in Berlin, but among foreign powers, Jews, communists, all who threatened his vision of purity and power. While Hitler turned resentment into ideology, France watched from afar. Victorious in the First World War, the country believed it had earned the right never to fight again. Its confidence rested in concrete, the Maginot Line, a colossal fortress built along the border with Germany. Cannons, bunkers, tunnels, and underground cities, the modern wall against war. But France looked backward, while Germany looked ahead. Hitler had no intention of reliving the past. He was reinventing war. Throughout the 1930s, while the French trusted their walls, Germans trained for speed. They created mobile tank divisions, the Panzers reorganized their air force, and developed a new doctrine, Blitzkrieg, lightning war. The concept was simple yet devastating. Strike fast, with concentrated force, breaking enemy lines before they could react. A war of movement, a war of surprise. In 1939, the world watched helplessly as this new weapon made its debut. On September 1st, Germany invaded Poland. In less than a month, the country was destroyed. Tanks tore through roads, aircraft bombed entire cities, and the Polish army, still anchored in outdated strategies, had no time to respond. France and the United Kingdom declared war on Germany, or did nothing. For months, they waited behind their defenses, convinced Hitler wouldn't dare advance into the West. This period became known as the Phony War. No shots fired, No movements, only the sound of radio stations broadcasting fear. But Hitler did not rest. While the French awaited an enemy at the Maginot Line, he planned an attack from the one place no one expected, the Ardennes, a mountainous, forested region along the Belgian-French border. French generals insisted tanks could never cross the dense terrain. Hitler smiled. That was precisely why he would strike there. Meanwhile, France sank into political uncertainty. The nation was internally divided, a generation traumatized by the First World War and a hesitant government, unable to believe horror would return. Newspapers announced minor diplomatic victories, politicians spoke of peace, and the French people, weary, preferred not to believe another invasion was possible. But the world was changing too fast. In April 1940, Germans invaded Norway and Denmark. Within weeks, they dominated northern Europe. Then, at dawn on May 10, 1940, the silence ended. The attack began simultaneously against the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. It was a smokescreen. While Allied forces rushed north to aid the Belgians and Dutch, German tank divisions surged through the Ardennes, slicing through the heart of French defenses. The plan was brilliant and ruthless. Army Group B advanced from the north, drawing Allied forces away. Army Group A, commanded by Gerd von Rundstedt, pushed through the forested center. Army Group C feigned an assault on the Maginot Line merely as a diversion. Within days, the trap was set. French troops, overconfident, realized too late they were surrounded. Generals trained in an era of slow warfare couldn't grasp the enemy's speed. While they studied maps, German tanks were already hundreds of kilometers ahead. France, which believed in walls, now faced an invisible enemy: speed. France's fate was being decided in days, not months. Radios reported defeat after defeat. Entire cities surrendered before French troops could reach them. Thousands of civilians fled inland, carrying suitcases, children, memories. The road to Paris became a river of desperation. And Hitler, watching from his maps in Berlin, knew his gamble had succeeded. The West was collapsing, and the whole world watched. May 10, 1940. The dawn that would change Europe forever. Within hours, the war, until then distant and silent, became a storm of steel and fire. Hitler's Germany launched the boldest strike in modern history, the invasion of France. As sirens wailed in cities and radios crackled with panicked orders, German forces crossed borders with surgical precision. In the Netherlands, paratroopers descended like swarms from the sky. In Belgium, fortresses deemed impregnable crumbled under bombs. And deep in the Ardennes forest, columns of Panzer tanks tore through terrain the French had deemed impassable. What France witnessed was a spectacle of horror and confusion. The enemy didn't advance in lines, he spread out, multiplied, attacked from every direction at once. Blitzkrieg wasn't just a tactic, it was a philosophy. Constant movement, rapid communication, concentrated power. The Germans struck like a ravenous beast, fast, coordinated, brutal. They're crossing the Ardennes. It's impossible, but it was already too late. French divisions sent north to rescue Belgium, and the Netherlands were caught by surprise. While they rushed toward an enemy advancing head-on, Hitler's tanks circled behind them, cutting off supply routes. In less than a week, French lines were split in two. The army meant to defend the nation was isolated and encircled exactly as Hitler had foreseen. In the north, British and French forces retreated desperately toward the coast. Cities like Lille, Amiens, and Arras were reduced to rubble within days. Germans advanced 30, 40, 50 kilometers a day. No modern army had ever moved with such speed. Then came Dunkirk, the symbol of both defeat and hope. Trapped between the sea and the enemy, over 300,000 British and French soldiers awaited their end. Hitler, confident, ordered a halt to ground operations, believing the Luftwaffe would finish the job. But that decision, seemingly tactical, would alter the course of the war. Between May 26th and June 1st, 1940, the world witnessed a miracle. Hundreds of civilian boats, fishing vessels, yachts, cargo ships crossed the English Channel under constant bombardment to rescue the stranded troops. The operation was named Dynamo. More than 338,000 men were saved. They left behind their weapons but carried with them the spirit of resistance. While the British army escaped by a thread, France bled. German troops surged southward like an unstoppable flood. Entire cities surrendered without a single shot fired, as French civilians fled before the enemy even arrived. Roads packed with refugees became targets. The Luftwaffe strafed columns of civilians without mercy. Women, children, the elderly all became part of the tragic landscape of modern war. The French government, panicking, began to disintegrate. Desperate messages were sent to London, pleading for reinforcements that would never arrive in time. Army morale collapsed. While Hitler celebrated daily victories, Paris awaited the inevitable. Yet the truth was even worse. Within just 1 month, German forces had shattered every defensive line. The famed Maginot Line, the pride of France, had simply been bypassed. Soldiers inside its bunkers didn't die in combat, they died isolated, forgotten. The German advance was so swift it even stunned Hitler himself. On June 14th, Paris fell. Tanks rolled down the boulevards as the Nazi flag rose over the Eiffel Tower. The City of Light, symbol for centuries of culture, art, and liberty, now trembled under the boot of the Third Reich. On the streets, fear took human form. Families hid French flags, shopkeepers shuttered their doors, and radios played soft music to mask the terror. Those who'd survived the First World War now watched their homeland kneel before the same enemy, but faster, crueler, deadlier. Prime Minister Paul Reynaud resigned. In his place, Marshal Felipe Pétain, a hero of the First World War, took command. But Pétain didn't intend to resist, he sought to negotiate. On June 17th, France requested an armistice. Hitler demanded it be signed in the very railway carriage where, in 1918, Germany had surrendered to France. Revenge was complete. The document was signed on June 22, 1940. France was officially defeated. 2/3 of its territory fell under German occupation. The remainder, in the south, would be governed by a new French administration under Nazi supervision, the Vichy regime. In less than 46 days, one of Europe's mightiest armies had been dismantled. The entire world stared, incredulous, at the map. France, the birthplace of revolution and modern liberty, had vanished. The Battle of France is over. The Battle of Britain is about to begin, and so the continent plunged into its longest night. Europe lay in Hitler's hands, and the flame of freedom now burned only across the English Channel. Narrated deep, measured voice, France fell in 46 days. But its soul was not yet dead. In the shadows, a new fight was born, a fight without uniforms, without flags, but with courage. Paris had fallen. In just 6 weeks, the French army, the pride of a nation that had defeated empires, had been crushed by Hitler's lightning force. But France's war was far from over. It had merely changed form. The country was now divided physically, politically, morally. In the north, German troops controlled major cities, factories, ports, and railways, the occupied zone, under the iron grip of the Third Reich. In the south, a shadow of autonomy, the so-called Vichy regime, led by Marshal Felipe Pétain. Officially, Vichy represented the French government. In reality, it was a puppet state-obedient, submissive, collaborationist. Pétain promised order, stability, reconstruction. But to many, his words sounded like surrender in disguise. Under the pretext of protecting the French people, he accepted Hitler's conditions, handing over Jews, censoring newspapers, dissolving political parties, and persecuting opponents. The motto of the French Revolution, Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité, disappeared from town squares and school books. In its place emerged a new slogan, Travail, Famille, Patrie, Work, Family, Fatherland. A bitter irony in a nation occupied by enemies. While the Vichy government bowed, a new kind of army emerged in the shadows, invisible, fragmented, yet determined. The French resistance. It began small journalists, students, ex-soldiers, priests, peasants, ordinary men and women who refused to accept defeat. Their weapons were rudimentary. Pamphlets, radios, ink, and courage. They sent coded messages to London, knowing each word could be their last. Each night, while German loudspeakers announced orders and curfews, they took to the streets to spread hope. From London, an exiled general became the symbol of resistance, Charles de Gaulle. On June 18, 1940, he delivered a historic broadcast over the BBC. The flame of French resistance must not and will not be extinguished. Those words crossed the English Channel and ignited hearts. From that moment, resistance became a moral duty. But resistance came at a high cost. The Gestapo, the Nazi secret police, hunted resistors with brutality, prisons, torture, executions on every corner. Posters offered rewards for information about French terrorists. Public executions in town squares reminded the population of the price of disobedience. Still, the movement grew, codes were created, communication networks formed, and sabotage operations began. Rail lines were blown up, depots set ablaze, telephone wires cut. Each act of resistance carried a message. France might be occupied, but it was not defeated. Meanwhile, daily life in the occupied zone became a mix of survival and humiliation. Parisians grew accustomed to seeing German soldiers stroll through cafes and theaters. Food was rationed, curfews enforced, censorship absolute. Life seemed to go on, but nothing was normal. Some tried to live, others profited. Collaboration with the enemy became a moral dilemma. Some did it out of fear, others for convenience. And there were those who collaborated out of ideology. France split in two, those fighting for freedom, and those kneeling to the Reich. The line between right and wrong blurred. Families were torn apart. One brother might be in the resistance, the other serving Vichy. Denunciations, betrayals, and disappearances became routine. Between 1941 and 1943, the situation worsened. The Nazis demanded more: coal, steel, grain and people. Thousands of French citizens were sent as forced laborers to German factories. Meanwhile, trains departed stations carrying Jewish prisoners from Vichy. Carefully compiled lists drawn up by French bureaucrats named families to be handed over to the Gestapo. Approximately 76,000 French Jews were deported. Most never returned, but the resistance answered back. Small groups like Les Francs-Tireurs and Combat joined forces with de Gaulle's movement. In 1943, the National Council of the Resistance was formed, coordinating actions across the country. Explosions, assassinations of Nazi officers, and sabotage escalated each month. Hitler ordered brutal reprisals. In a village called Oradour-sur-Glane, his troops executed 640 civilians, men, women, and children, burning them alive. It was a message: defy the Reich and you will die. Yet the flame did not go out. Divided, France remained alive, one half submissive, the other rebellious. The war had become a battle for the nation's soul. On one side, Vichy sought to prove its loyalty to the Reich. On the other, the resistance swore allegiance to de Gaulle's Free France. Between these two forces, millions of civilians simply tried to survive. And each of them, consciously or not, was part of this struggle. France lived in a time of shadows and impossible choices. This was no longer a war of tanks and armies alone, it was a moral war. Who was a traitor? Who was a hero? In the end, the line between courage and cowardice became nearly invisible. But even in the darkness of occupation, a silent promise echoed through streets, clandestine radios, and the hearts of resistors. One day, France would be free again. 1944. Europe had bled for 5 years. Millions were dead, empires had fallen, and the world seemed to have forgotten the meaning of peace. But in the dark streets of occupied France, something began to shift. The room of hope returned. Sound of distant aircraft growing louder. Scenes of Allied tanks in Normandy, ships landing under heavy fire. At dawn on June 6, 1944, war returned to France. It was D-Day. Hundreds of thousands of Allied troops landed on the beaches of Normandy, facing machine guns, mines, and barbed wire. Operation Overlord was the largest amphibious invasion in history. And behind every explosion, every plume of smoke, lay a promise: France will be free again. As the Allies advanced from the north, the resistance intensified its fight inland. Coded messages crackled over clandestine radios: "The ship is ready. The sun will shine tomorrow." Each phrase signaled a coordinated action. Saboteurs blew up railways, halting German reinforcements. Entire towns rose up against their occupiers. And for the first time in 4 years, the French fought openly in the field side by side with the Allies. German forces tried to resist, but encirclement was inevitable. Hitler's empire began to crumble. Then, on August 25, 1944, Paris rose up. Barricades appeared in the streets. The people took up arms. After days of combat, tanks of the French 2nd Armored Division, commanded by General Leclerc, rolled triumphantly into the capital. The City of Light shone once more. The next day, Charles de Gaulle marched down the Champs-Élysées amid ruins. Surrounded by cheers, tears, and celebratory gunfire, he declared to the people: Paris outraged, Paris broken, Paris martyred, but Paris liberated. It was a nation's rebirth. But freedom, like everything in war, came at a price. The country that emerged from occupation was not the same. Victory brought joy, but also shame. France had to confront its own reflection and see in it the scars of fear, collaboration, and guilt. For 4 years, the Vichy government had actively collaborated with the Nazis. Thousands of French Jews had been deported by French hands. After liberation came reckoning. A dark chapter of history began. It was called the Epuration, the Purification. Men and women, accused of treason, were tried, imprisoned, or executed. Some were guilty, others merely suspects. Amid the thirst for justice, vengeance also reigned. Women who had relationships with German soldiers were publicly humiliated, their heads shaved, dragged through streets amid insults and laughter. It was the brutal catharsis of a people desperate to redeem their shame. Marshal Philippe Pétain, a hero of the First World War, was tried for treason. Sentenced to death, his sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. He died 3 years later in a cold cell, alone and forgotten. But France's greatest punishment came not from courts, it came from conscience. For decades, the nation struggled against silence. Schools rarely spoke of Vichy. Governments tried to erase the stains of collaboration. Only in the 1990s did President Jacques Chirac officially acknowledge France's responsibility in the deportations. The war had ended, but the wounds remained open. More than 500,000 French citizens died during the conflict. Cities were destroyed, families shattered. Free France was reborn, but amidst the rubble of its own history. And yet, there was pride too. The resistance, once seen as a handful of dreamers, became a national symbol. Men and women who fought in the shadows, who risked everything. Even their lives were finally honored.